biology major, and I'll be talking about the Philippines, the place where I grew up.
Hi, I'm Jada Smith. I am currently a sophomore at UNC with a major in media and journalism and a minor in Spanish. And I will be discussing and talking a little bit more about Costa Rica, and that is where I grew up.
Hey, I'm Savannah McCure. I'm a senior here at Carolina, and I'm an interdisciplinary studies major. I'll be talking about the Native American culture.
So today we'll talk about cultural stereotypes, focusing on Costa Rica, the Philippines, and Native Americans. What is a stereotype? A stereotype is a standardized mental picture that is held in common by members of a group that represent an oversimplified opinion, prejudice, attitude, or uncritical judgment. Cultural misconception is characterized by the lack of understanding by society at large of a specific culture that often leads to a misconception about that given society. Today we'll kind of address some of the cultural misconceptions and stereotypes about Costa Rica, the Philippines, and Native Americans. What comes to mind when you think of a Latino? And you can tell your teacher to type in your answers in the chat.
Just moment.
A lot of the time.
Oh, we just got one.
Okay.
Oh.
There we go. So they said people from Spanish descent, Spanish-speaking people, anyone of Hispanic descent is Mexican, girls with flowy dresses.
Okay. A lot of times when people think of Latinos, they have an image of mestizos. Mestizos is characterized specifically in Central and South America. It's a person of combined Native American and European descent. Many times people are unaware of the diversity that is found in Latin America. There are many groups, Asian, Black, and this also has to do with the lack of representation in the media. A lot of times in American and Latin American media, you see images like Sofia Vergara. And because of that, that's what people associate with being Latino. As well as that, there is also a lack of representation overall of Latin American people. And this is because of typecasting, which is when people or groups of people like Latinos are only given the opportunity to act in certain roles. For example, like being the maid or being the help. And this also gives less space for other Latino racial groups to be represented in media overall. So I will be focusing on Costa Rica. This is a little bit of background of the country. It is located in Central America between Nicaragua and Panama. It has a population a little under 5 million people. And its ethnic presentations are mestizo or European descent makes up about 83.6%, African descent about 8%, indigenous groups like the Bribri, Cabecar, and Chorotega make up about 2.42%, and the Chinese is less than 1%. Although the mestizos make up the majority of the country, it is important to notice that there are many different racial groups in the country, and this is only a small look of how Latin America looks overall. So I'll be talking a little bit about Afro-Latinidad in Costa Rica. And these are people of African descent that came to the coast of Costa Rica. It's a little bit different than the rest of Latin America, in which many of the Black people that arrived to the coast did not come over as slaves, but rather they came over looking for jobs, specifically building the country's railroad system, as well as working in the cocoa, banana, and coffee plantations. The culture is very vibrant, specifically in the province of Limón, which is the province that has the highest concentration of Black people, and that is where my family's from. There is a huge celebration of Afro-descendant culture through its food, clothing, and festivals. Foods are pretty similar to what you would find in the rest of the Caribbean. Caribbean, sorry. And then the clothing is very tropical, as well as using African prints. There's festivals and carnivals that go on, especially August 31st, which is El Día del Afro-Descendencia, which is also known as Afro-Descendants Day, in which it's basically like a whole party in the province, a lot of food, a lot of Afro beats, Afro-Caribbean beats, just celebrating the area's history. And I also linked more information on the province of Limon, and I did my Inamoto video on it, so you guys can check it out. The many shades of Afro-Latinidad. So another misconception or issue that is faced by the community is colorism. Colorism is a prejudice or discrimination, especially within a racial or ethnic group, favoring people with lighter skin over those with darker skin. This is a big problem in the Latino community, in which people who are of lighter complexion are considered more Latino than people of darker complexion. And I showed pictures of my family, so my little cousin, and that's me and my friend from elementary school, and on the farthest is my entire family. And this just goes to show that no matter what skin tone you are, or like what range you are, we're 100% Costa Rican, and therefore we're 100% Latino. So as discussed before, I talked a little bit more about Afro-Latinidad, and I just wanted to give a definition of it. It is people that identify as both Latino and Black, characterized by their African descent. This video kind of shows more of the misconceptions that the Afro-Latino community faces, and what Afro-Latinos want you to know. And it's from
We love Star Wars this much.
Verizon te da más magia en estas fiestas. Ahora con Disney Plus incluido en todos los planes Unlimited desde $35 por línea con llamadas ilimitadas a México. La red en la que más gente confía te da más.
I remember when I first discovered what Black was.
Is something that I don't take lightly, and I embrace because it's part of who I am.
Nosotros queremos un mundo que decimos que tenemos un latino unidos, pero con el mismo tiempo tenemos que terminar la discriminación entre nosotros los latinos.
Estamos como estamos porque somos racistas entre nosotros mismos, entre nuestra propia gente. ¿Sabes qué? No nos apoyamos.
I always feel like I'm never Latina enough because of my skin color, because of my hair.
I would just hear my family be like, oh, don't go out with somebody that's dark-skinned. Que no salga con un negro. Arregla la raza.
Dark skin in the Latino community isn't considered beautiful.
We've been colonized so poorly that we want to identify with being white so much, not all of us, but many of us, that we look down on dark skin.
Tú como negro latino tienes dos problemas. Primero, eres negro, te discriminan por negro. Y segundo, eres latino y te discriminan por latino. Eso es doble minoría.
I remember when I was a kid, I looked at myself in the mirror. Yo dije, esta nariz, estos labios que tengo yo, I'm ugly. ¿Sabes que yo era? Porque yo pensaba que yo era feo.
Tuve una compañera de trabajo que me enteré que a mi espalda se expresaba de mí como mona, la mona. ¿Sabes qué es lo más triste? Que ella era una latina. I know I always stress to my family whenever they say something like, they'll be like, Julissa, tú y eso moreno. And I'm like, we are the morenos. That's us.
Your parents are instilling in you that these European features are the most beautiful thing. The standard of beauty for them is blonde hair and blue eyes.
I think there's some colorism just across the board because we've been taught that lighter skin is beautiful.
Since light skin and fair skin is being portrayed on all platforms like TV and media and all of these things, it lets me know that that's what they perceive as beautiful.
And then you look on TV in the telenovelas, they don't look like me, ever. The only one I can remember is Celia.
Algo que me pasa muy seguido es que las personas dicen, ay, qué bonita eres para ser una negrita. Entonces, una persona negra no puede ser bonita.
Dark skin is beautiful, and it has melanin in it, and it doesn't age. We hate ourselves so much that we really don't understand how beautiful we are.
Que yo, por mi color, o por lo que tú crees, tú no me vas a parar. Que yo voy a triunfar. Lo que yo voy a hacer, yo voy a triunfar.
Embrace the beauty that is you, because most people are trying to look like you. They're going to get their hair curled. They're going to get tans. They're getting injections in their butts and in their lips. They want to look like you. So don't hate you because everybody wants to look like you.
Si había una fórmula, yo creo que ya lo habíamos arreglado. No hay ninguna fórmula. Tú como individuo tienes que enseñar a tu gente de ser orgulloso de ser lo que eres. Somos negros y debemos ser orgullosos de nuestra raza.
And it's okay to be brown and dark, and it's okay to have beautiful big lips and features like this. It is okay. It is more than okay, actually, because the world changes and moves in different rhythms. And right now, people want to look like us.
That's what I would say.
So that is okay.
So this kind of shows the associations with Black Latinos within the Latin American community itself. And this kind of goes back into all Afro-Latinos are from Puerto Rico or Cuba. This also happens to me, where a lot of people don't realize that most of Latin America, actually all of Latin America, has a Black population. And this is because of the slave trade that happened in between 1650 and 1860, in which Africans were taken from their respective countries and brought over to the Americas, specifically Central South America and the Caribbean, for labor. Just some more on the positive side, there's a lot of awareness about Afro-Latinidad that's going on. As mentioned in the video, Celia Cruz was one of the few Afro-Latinas that you used to see in the media. She was a Cuban singer, very successful. Now we have Amara La Negra, and she was on Love and Hip Hop Miami. And she was very proud of who she is, and she demonstrated that within the show, as well as showing the discrimination that she faced because of being of a darker complexion and being Latina. But now she uses her platform, specifically Instagram, and speaking engagements, impacting and bringing awareness to Afro-Latinos. Another big player in the awareness of Afro-Latinidad is Janelle Martinez, and she created the blog Ain't I Latina, and she just talks about the problems that the community faces, as well as bringing awareness to the rich culture and history that we have. And I kind of just wanted to close up and say that I think what I want to share the most is that be open about all Latinos, and not question their identity is a big thing. And yeah, there's just a lot of beauty and diversity in Latin America.
All right, we'll move on to the second part of it. I'll be talking about, again, my name is Timothy Hall, and I'll be talking about the Philippines. In our language, Tagalog, we actually not say just the Philippines as a country, but it's the Republic of the Philippines, or Republika ng Pilipinas. So I'd like to start by asking the group a question of what comes to mind when you think about the Philippines or about Filipinos in general. So like earlier, just tell your instructor your answers, and just type your answers in the chat box.
Good food, the South Pacific.
Yeah, those are, it's quite accurate because the Philippines is actually located around the Pacific Ocean, southeast of Asia, and there's a lot of different foods, yes. We'll talk about a little bit of it later. Oh, okay. So just to move on with the presentation, just wanted to show you where the Philippines in the world map is that group of islands right there. So I'm zooming in, you can see an interesting shape of the Philippines, and it's a bunch of group of islands. Starting off, when I'll be grouping my discussion in regard to our opinion about the Philippines in relation to tourism, media, and just the communities, what things that we learned from those experiences. So some looking into tourism, some people think that when they go visit an island, if you've seen one, you've seen them all. And I would disagree with that because the Philippines has over 7,000 islands. And that varies as well in terms of when it's high tide or low tide. As you can see, just in this picture, you can see a bunch of small islands. In those small islands, is actually a good landmass that you can explore by itself. We have different natural wonders. This is like one of the biggest volcanoes in the Philippines. We have different forms of land, like we have water, bodies of water, man-made things. This picture over here is called the Benali rice terraces, and it's actually man-made. Like, we love rice a lot, that we had made a mountain into a place where we can plant rice. So that's what this is. It's like a bunch of steps, and each step is like filled with rice. They grow it there. We have caves and different architectural things influenced by Western cultures as it was colonized. Bottom line is that there is, like we were talking about Costa Rica earlier, it was like the diversity in the Philippines is something that we don't really think much about because we don't really purely represent like a particular cultural groups, because we have had a lot of influences of different countries because it was a colony of 2 different countries, along with Western influences in the country. So the other thing which is more popular right now is that the Philippines is a dangerous country. This is popularized by media and of course the administration, like putting like bans in traveling most recent years. One of the biggest things that has contributed to this was the big talk about Mindanao. Mindanao, there is like some relationship with some terror groups. And this has been going on for years. It's been a civil war in the Philippines for a long time, and it's isolated in that region of the Philippines. I grew up in the northern part of the Philippines, and I have no experience whatsoever. I don't know what's going on down there until like I started looking at media. So here's what we kind of a time where we would end up having a generalization of a country as a whole by a regional issue. I wouldn't say that there was no problems in that area. Typically, we would just avoid traveling to Mindanao, but I personally have traveled to some regions of Mindanao that are unaffected by the civil war, and it's just something that you can't it's something that we can't generalize about a country. So if we look at other countries that actually have wars going on, there are safe places in those countries. It's not the representation of the whole country, because even a small country as the Philippines, it's not something that you can have in a big scale to happen in the whole nation. And lastly, I'm gonna talk about this misconception, or maybe some things that people think about as they meet Filipinos, as to have an absurd fondness of food, basketball, karaoke, and rice. And I'm gonna tell you that this stereotype or misconception is actually true in a certain degree. You can't generalize Filipinos, but this is in the Philippines. We love our food. Like somebody has mentioned it earlier that there's a lot of good foods in the Philippines. And big thing I'm gonna harp on is rice, as you can see. The Philippines loves rice so much that we have like, if you go and buy rice in the Filipino market, you can see that they have like a ridiculous amount of options of the different varieties of how old it is, how big the grains are, how they smell like. And on top of that, we cook them differently. We even make desserts out of the rice. Most people think that's a little bit weird when you make cakes out of them, but that's very typical in the Philippines. We even make rice wine. There's a lot of things that we do with rice. And you can see the variety of different foods that we have in the Philippines. And this picture here is representing that we even eat rice for breakfast. And that's very typical breakfast. If you want to have a breakfast, you eat it with rice. Basketball, as you can see, I don't know if anybody recognizes Manny Pacquiao. He's popular in the boxing field. He also plays basketball, and he's a little shorter on the side, but everyone knows how to play basketball to some extent in the Philippines. And then karaoke. It's almost like a shaming thing for Filipinos if someone couldn't or didn't want to sing in a karaoke. In every family event, there is a karaoke that we even created this device we call the Magic Sing. You can look it up, and it's like a microphone that comes with a CD that you can put in a CD player, and it has like a bunch of songs. You pretty much play karaoke in your living room, which is something that was like an amazing hit in the Philippines, and it still is because it's such a mainstay in all of the events that we do. So yeah, that's it for now, and then we're gonna move on to Savannah.
Yeah, so I'm Savannah, and similar to what we just did, we're going to do the same thing within our chats. We're going to answer this question: what comes to mind when you think about someone who identifies as Native American? So tell your teachers to type something up in the chat for us.
Indians. Pocahontas. Sitting Bull, Tecumseh, Cherokee Tribes, Squanto, Standing Rock, Tradition, Myths and Legends, Mother Earth, and Feathers.
Awesome. So to speak a little bit more onto Native American culture, we want to go through a couple different misconceptions. So the first one is Christopher Columbus was the first person to arrive to America. So Columbus never discovered America. He actually never stepped foot in North America, but instead he ended up in the Caribbean islands, so which is now known as the Bahamas to us. The Taino people, which stood for the good people in their language, were the ones that the people that he discovered. And before 1492, the population of the Taino people were at a height as the highest as almost 8 million. And the Taino people had a beautiful culture. They had different ways of hunting and gathering to gather food. They saw the little need in having clothing just because there was tropic heat there. It was super, super hot, and they didn't really see a need for it until they reached puberty. So the men and women would then wear some clothing. Since Columbus saw himself as very different as the Taino people, he immediately gave himself hierarchy over them. He had more clothing on, and that's what he thought was right. He had the ships and the weaponry and the gold and the prize, the money, which is why he displayed the Taino people as objects rather than really characterizing them as a people, as a group of people. The next misconception is Thanksgiving. So the Pilgrims invited, this is the story that you may know of, as the Pilgrims were invited the Native American to have a dinner as a dinner of thanks when the Native American people brought them goods from their land. So Thanksgiving started not as this loving relationship between Pilgrims and Native people with turkey and cranberry sauce and pumpkin pie, but in fact, this day was called the days that this was called a feast. It took place. Some of the Pilgrims built actually a 11-foot tall wall, not to keep Native Americans in, but to keep them out. And this holiday we know as Thanksgiving came into existence in 1637. So the governor of Massachusetts, he proclaimed this the first official day of Thanksgiving because some of the colony had returned from Connecticut. And they were returning from Connecticut because they were participating in a massacre of over 700 Native American men, women, and children. The governor decided that, and to dedicate this feast, they would call it Thanksgiving, so that the colonists having this victory over massacring these men, women, children that were all Native. And based back when we were possibly in elementary school or younger in kindergarten, I know you can maybe recall making a feathered hat, which mimics like an indigenous headset. It might have had just a band around it with a couple feathers sticking out. This is how we think about Thanksgiving, rather than thinking about really what came to happen and how it wasn't really a happy dinner amongst pilgrims and Native people. So another misconception is that Native Americans were savages. There are people who believe that Native Americans are and were savages, and this stereotype is easy recognizable again with the tomahawks, the bows and arrows, and the feathers in your hair, similar to maybe if you created that back when you were younger. But the real idea of Native Americans are actually they're very, very peaceful people. Most of them didn't even go into war unless that they were threatened or war was started against them. So the length and the depth of this propaganda to make Native Americans look like savages was, it worked completely because the Europeans, they invaded the native lands, and yet the Native Americans were the ones who looked like war-hungry savages. So it helped the Europeans in their favor to make them, stereotypically make them what they thought would be as a savage. And this is continuing on today in American society through offensive sport teams and names and mascots. And as you can see in this picture, you have the Redskins, and this is a form of systemic racism or institutional racism, which is a form of racism that is expressed in practice of social and political institutions. So it can be reflected through disparities of wealth, income, education, housing, healthcare, and it is really being repetitive through these different images that are continuing through our society. Another misconception is that all Native Americans lived in teepees, and this is just completely untrue. Teepees were actually mainly just used for Native Americans who traveled frequently because they were easy to break down and take with them wherever they were going. Many Native Americans who had more permanent dwellings and spaces, they had more permanent homes. These were just as if they were traveling or on the go. So these were by no means something that they consistently dwelled in, the only place of living for Native Americans. So our last misconception is that Indians were uncivilized until Europeans got involved. So this is just simply untrue. Native people were civilized. Their culture was just different from Europeans. It is a fact that Native Americans' culture was different from Europeans, which made it, again, it made Europeans think that they were savages, uncivilized, and just completely different. So it seemed wrong to the Europeans. For example, like earlier, we talked about how they had unique clothing, and it was different than Europeans. They wore little to no clothing, which Europeans saw as not really had any power in their eyes, and it made them think that they were uncivilized since they weren't fully clothed like they were when they arrived. And right now, I know somebody mentioned Pocahontas, and I thank you for actually speaking out and saying Pocahontas, because it is something that should be spoke about, because as growing up, it is one of the first things that you get to realize if you're not around Native Americans, what you think a Native person is. And in this movie, Pocahontas, there's a part where John Smith, who's also imaged right there, and he calls Pocahontas a savage, and she comes back and says, by savage you mean not like you, which is really a strong way to combat this. And even though Pocahontas really does stereotypically image Native people, and it really gives them that, it gives you the idea, just similar to the image before, it gives you the idea of having feathers, all having this similar way of dressing and being, when the other parts of the movies with the family and how they live day to day, and all through it. So with her to come back and say, by savages you mean not like you, it really is true when she says that, because she isn't wearing, in real life, she wasn't wearing many clothes. And that, again, was what characterized them to be uncivilized. So we'll go one by one through these pictures. And these are pictures of today of Native American people who are living and breathing, and some are on this campus right now, and showing them truly what they're doing and how they're really having an impact. This first image right here is Ryan. He's actually a senior here at Carolina, and he's aspiring to be a clinical lab scientist. So he's really breaking this idea that Native Americans are uneducated and that they're not capable of being something so prestige as a scientist. Next we have, actually last year, this is the group of first-year students of Native students who came to Carolina. So you can see here again, like Jada spoke earlier, everybody's skin tone is not the same when you speak about Native people, but that doesn't mean that there are any less degree of Indigenous. Next we have, this is a young student who came to perform at our Carolina powwow. We actually host the largest East Coast powwow, collegiate powwow. So this is an actual image of the regalia and the time and the sacredness of what goes into your actual regalia and the actual headset, unlike maybe headsets that you see in Halloween costumes. They have no actual significance compared to this, because of the time and the story that is put into this is very, very strong. This is actually Alpha Pi Omega. I'm actually pictured in this sorority too. I'm not Indigenous myself, but I actually come from Lumberton, North Carolina, and it's in Robeson County, which is home of the Lumbee tribe. And all these girls, some of them came from Robeson County, some came from other parts of North Carolina, but it's an Indigenous sorority that is inclusive to everybody, but we really are here to make an impact on this campus and all other campus that we are on, to be able to educate other students about Indigenous culture, about Native Americans. And that's very similar as to why I joined, because not only did these girls feel like home to me, but I really seen the need coming from a county which was very rich in culture to come to a school that really wasn't as rich in culture as where I come from. So I felt the need to educate other students on this campus. Next we have, this is our brother fraternity. So it's Phi Sigma Nu, very similar. They are a Native American based fraternity, but inclusive as well. And they're here to represent the Native population on Carolina's campuses, but also across different campuses as well. And next we have Michaela. She actually was crowned Miss Halawasaponi from year 2016 to 2017. She now does actually attend Carolina. She's a junior here. And now we have Jameson. He is a senior here at Carolina. He's actually the president of CIC, which is known as Carolina Indian Circle. And with this organization, very similar to the fraternity and the sorority, we are here to act as a space for Native people to feel welcome and safe amongst this campus, and as well as, again, educate others on Indigenous culture and allow them to really come to understand maybe some of these misconceptions that they had of Native Americans, and see the truth. And last we have Haley. She actually has a red teardrop on her eye, and this was from Indigenous Peoples Day, but you might know it as Columbus Day. And she had this red teardrop on her eye to actually have remembrance of all the missing and murdered Indigenous women. And it's really, really strong because it's something that is very prominent in today and even in the past. And it being Indigenous Peoples Day, she wanted to really express her remembrance of all these people, all these women. Lastly, we actually have the representation of North Carolina is home to 8 Native tribes. So in the yellow there, that is the Lumbee tribe of North Carolina. So I'm from Robeson County, and there's also Hoke in Scotland, which is very, very close to my heart. But again, we are very, very diverse and rich in North Carolina to have as many Native tribes as we do. Next, we have the actual representation of North America as a whole. There are 562 Native American tribes just in the U.S. alone. And you can see that it's it stretches largely across Canada. And just in the U.S., there are more than 3 million people in the U.S. who are Native. And this is really, really big and something that we really want to be able to hone in on, because something that we do here at Carolina and across many, many other places, we have the "We're Still Here." So when we create our T-shirts, or we are ever in the public sphere trying to educate people across campus, we do have this hashtag "We're Still Here," because it is hard sometimes to believe when you're either outside of your culture or never being exposed to it, to understand that Native people are still here and still exist today, when it is so misconcepted and shown as in movies like Pocahontas that they're no longer in existence. But this is something that we have really pushed and to try to show across our campus and many, many other campuses as well, that Native Americans still exist.
And this is just a recap of the places that we discussed and where they are in the map. So the first dot, which is in North America, that's specifically North Carolina, and that just kind of shows like the Native American groups that we talked about there. The second dot is in Central America, and that's for Costa Rica. And the third dot is for the Philippines. So you guys can understand more of like where they are in the world. And I think it just goes to show that though they're very different, these misconceptions do carry through the 3 groups that we talked about, and just to bring awareness and as a whole work towards being inclusive to the diversity that is present in all of these places.
So now we're going to do a little recap on our presentation. So if you can, we're going to write the answers to these questions in the chat. So what is a stereotype? What is a cultural misconception? And if willing, we would love to hear maybe some stories if you're able to relate from your own life experiences about maybe a stereotype or cultural misconception. And then as well as how you can relate this to the larger world. So we'll give you some time to write your answers in the chat.
It can be for any of the questions, whatever you feel like answering.
So someone said a stereotype is a broad idea about a group of people that is discriminatory.
Mm-hmm.
I guess we can talk about that answer. And I think stereotypes could be discriminatory, but won't necessarily be discriminatory sometimes. I've given like some examples in the Philippines earlier where we actually like rice. If people think we like rice, we actually like rice. And it's because that's the common food. And I think it's not discriminatory. It's just something of a generalized idea about a group of people that may lead to us oversimplifying everything about the group of people. So it could lead to a misunderstanding for certain things that we might think.
We have another answer. A cultural misconception is a wrong idea about a cultural or group of people. Incorrect idea.
Yeah, I guess like stereotypes kind of tie into the cultural misconception, as when we form this idea of a group of people, it can lead us to misunderstand like something about their culture because we oversimplified an aspect of them and generalize everybody in this box. All right.
We have one more. We were surprised to learn about the backstory to the Thanksgiving holiday. How can we still celebrate Thanksgiving but still be respectful to Native Americans and Native American culture? I don't know if you guys have any ideas on that.
That's
a very good question.
That's a good question.
I think the biggest thing is doing some self-research yourself. So Thanksgiving is not a bad thing by no means. I mean, you mostly gather with your family, you're having meals, whatever you may do. You may have traditional meals, you may go out and eat. But whatever you do, it's really just important that you're able to internalize what actually happened on Thanksgiving and that it wasn't just a happy dinner amongst pilgrims and natives. And then use your own knowledge to be able to educate maybe your friends and your family as well. It's something that isn't really talked about because we always think of Thanksgiving as a happy time and as a dinner that was celebrated in the past. So now we're going to continue that tradition. But I would think the biggest thing right now is to be able to, if this is the first time you understanding this or coming or realizing this, to maybe do your own research, read a little bit more on it, and then to ask. That's the biggest thing is if you have questions, ask about them. If you know somebody who's maybe native and you feel comfortable enough asking them, by all means, definitely have the courage to do that, because you're not going to be able to continue and understand and realize what truly happened, and then too how people view it today, unless you're having that communication. And if you might not know anybody who is native, just ask maybe your teachers or whoever you feel comfortable with, and be able to hold each other accountable and understanding the truth.
Yeah, and I think it's important to recognize that for everything, and it's in celebrations just like Thanksgiving, we define it based on our own experiences of Thanksgiving. And in our definition, since we celebrate it in a way that is like family, is important, like to sit together and have a good meal, that is still true. It doesn't make it any, like, it doesn't completely take it off of your like culture, your own experiences, that now it's not valid. It's still valid. That is your way of celebrating Thanksgiving. But it's important for us to recognize that there are other like origins of the stories, and for other people it could mean different. I think that's an important takeaway from that difference.
And I think that kind of goes in with all of the groups and all the misconceptions that we talked about today, is being open to learning about different stories, different, I guess like the diversity in general. Also being accepting of that, like when someone corrects you or expresses that they are different, you as trying to be a global citizen should be more open and understanding of how they feel and how they represent themselves.
All right, which actually this is like a good another
segue. No more.
All this discussion was actually perfect in our closing presentation. So why is it important for us to even think about other cultures and knowing all these differences, misconceptions, and stereotypes? So what is relevant? So this is like a long topic to really discuss, but this is like the early steps that we can consider to where we're at right now, to be more culturally competent in our interactions with other people. I think the first step would be to recognize our personal and unconscious biases. And this is like kind of going into the misconception part, where we make these assumptions and like beliefs of things and the way they are, and for a particular group of people before we even interact with them or know more about them. And the second step, like we have to recognize where we where those ideas came from. So they came from somewhere. We learned it from home. We learned it from a school, a friend, a parent, or an uncle. But it's important that we identify those biases and why do we think that way. So see the influences and the impact of those sorts of information, because it's varying levels. Like when we think about things passively, when somebody has mentioned something and taught us about something, it's good to question it a little bit and understand, like before we try to process it and generalize a group of people, to know that this could be too generalized. You know, it might not apply to everybody, and it's an important thing. And lastly is to take responsibility for your current beliefs. And this is, as we recognize our personal unconscious biases and identify where those came from, now this is like the time for us to take action, recognize that we can do something, we can change the way we think. Is we can do research and understand more about the culture. We can talk more about other people and be open about the ideas and variations to those current beliefs that we have. So yeah. And we're gonna go into question and answer. If you have any particular question about anything that we talked about today, just tell your instructor to type it in the chat box. And you can also have questions about advice, about a particular thing, way of thinking, anything that you can think about that is kind of vague or you're having a difficulty to understand. It's a safe space.
What made you decide on your current career path? So each of you, in terms of what you're thinking about doing.
I guess I can start. I am trying to become a doctor. I'm a biology major, pre-med. To me, it's more about the interactions that I've had in my life, which I looked at what I valued the most. And to me, that's having the interaction with individuals. I want to be a family medicine physician. I want to be a primary care physician. And I think it's important for me to hear from people, hear their stories, apply it in a scientific way. And the only way I could do that is to become a physician and to have time and spend time talking to people and learning more about them and helping them out medically.
For me, I want to be a graphic designer. I have always had a passion for art, and this career path is more applicable, so I can actually get a job. But honestly, what inspired me is teaching others about different cultures, and I'm Afro-Latina, and that's something that I value very much. And if I can do that through an artistic path, then I think that I can inspire others in being more accepting or viewing different groups differently. But yeah, I think media is something that's really big and really impactful in society now. So I think that being able to bring a little bit more of my culture and expressing other people's culture through design is great. Yeah.
So what I'm aspiring to be is actually an entrepreneur, but what I'm going to be starting out is in my career path is going into sales at a tech firm in Oracle. But I think, or when I first started Carolina, I was actually on the pre-med track and I was headed to be a doctor because it was very strong back home and still back home, and just to really have that strong community and want to stay in that community, because if you go outside of it, you're going to turn into somebody maybe your parents don't want you to be, or, you know, really kind of to grab onto your own aspirations and your own what makes you happy. And it was really, really extremely hard for me to turn away and against wanting to be a doctor, because that was my Mima's idea of success and what was going to be able to provide for my family. And that's something that I've really noticed being back home as home of the Lumbee tribe in Robeson County and a couple other counties too. But is that strong connection to stay there and stay at home. And that is by all means awesome. I will always be tied back home to my community and will always want to feed back into them. But I do know that coming to Carolina has been the biggest blessing of my entire life, and it's invaluable to me because it has provided me with the ability to understand that being a doctor is not for me at all, by no means, but I see myself now actually being able to provide success for my family and actually be happy, and continuing to chase that dream to be an entrepreneur and starting out my career and beginning in what I think is best.
Yeah, I think it's important to stay true to yourself and really understand what is important to you. And I think everybody's kind of
finding your own path.
Yeah,
It's definitely for me. My family, there's a lot of educators in my family, teachers, professors. That's not my path, but if I can have the same impact, but in my own track, I think that's how you make yourself happy and therefore you produce better.
Yeah, it's the opposite for me. I'm a first generation college student. Nobody in my family had education beyond high school.
Mm-hmm.
And it was difficult to think about what I wanted. It took me a little while, and I am a returning student. And now I can say after working a little bit and figuring out what happens in the world, what is most important to me.
Similar.
I thought it was somebody asking a question.
Any questions? We can speak on them.
Yeah.
So I told them any questions about Costa Rica, the Lumbee tribe, the Philippines, or about your experiences that you guys have had, whether they're about stereotypes and cultural misconceptions or just general about anything about the countries. Someone said, thank you so much for your time invested and for providing us all of this rich knowledge.
Thank you.
We can head out and get one last. Any other last questions? Okay. All right. Thank you everyone for your participation. We will be back at 11:30 with our next presentation, which is going to be mostly in Spanish. So I think we have some Spanish classes here. So 11:30 to 12:30, and then we have another presentation. The next one is on art and culture in Mexico, Ecuador, and Argentina. And then 1 to 2 p.m. we have festivals in Spain and Brazil. So we'll be back, and we will see you guys hopefully later today.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.